Jnanatimirandasya Gyanam Jana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhavitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhescha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Yantah Pravishya Mama Vachimam Prasuptam Sanjivaya Tekila Shakti Darasvadamna Anyamscha Hasta Charana Shravanat Vagadim Prananamo Bhagavate Purushaya. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I am very happy to be again in Mathura Desh of New Rajapur. New Rajapur.
You're all the same.
And Rasakrida Parayana Prabhu asked me to speak 3 nights about some topic, to develop some topic during 3 nights tonight, on Sunday and Monday. And he asked me to speak on the topic of some of my seminars which I gave before. And Mataji asked me to speak about chanting the holy name. So I decided to combine it. And I will speak these 3 nights. I will speak about the initial stages of spiritual development according to Srila Rupa Goswami. In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he gives this seminal verse, Ado Shraddha Tatah Sadhu Sangha, where he describes the stages of spiritual development. And these stages, they ultimately have to come to bring us to the love of God, to prema. We're still very far away from this goal. But it's very important to understand what's going on in these initial stages of spiritual development and what should we do. Because Srila Prabhupada, he usually said that Krishna consciousness is a science. And science means there are some scientific rules and some scientific understanding has to be there. Otherwise, we will not progress from stage to stage. We will stuck in one particular stage. And I will try to explain these things according to, of course, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who wrote the whole book on this topic, Madhuri Kadambini, but also from some other books like Jiva Goswami and, of course, Prabhupada, and my own deliberation on this topic as well. In my opinion, the incorrect understanding of this is a cause of many, many problems in ISKCON. And in our society, in our personal life, we sometimes feel that we are stuck somewhere, that we're not really moving somewhere, we're not making the next step, and we're not even sure whether we want to make the next step or not, or we want to remain where we are. We are quite comfortable here. So there are many connected issues, but it's interesting to note that Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his Bhajan Rahasya starts the whole Bhajan Rahasya, his whole, and Bhajan Rahasya is supposed to be the guidebook of how to chant Hare Krishna mantra. So his whole approach to this topic of how to chant Hare Krishna mantra is according to the stages of spiritual development. And from the very beginning, he says that while we're chanting, we have to kind of overview the whole spiritual path. And in fact, if we take Shikshashtakam of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is his only and most important composition, where he basically included the whole philosophy of Krishna consciousness in just 8 verses, he starts this Shikshashtakam from the overview of the whole process. Chetadarpanam arjanam bhava mahadavagni nirvapanam shreya kairava chandrika vitaranam vidyavadu jivanam. He more or less describes the whole process, and when we chant, we very clearly have to see the path. Like in GPS. If you use GPS, then, they show the path. And initially they show the whole path, and then details of each turn and all different varieties of the ways which you can take, so on and so forth. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that initially when we just chant, when we take our beads, he says that the whole Hare Krishna mantra is the description of the path. He says the first Hare Krishna is removal of ignorance. The second Hare Krishna is developing the faith, and so on and so forth. He's describing these 8 pairs of Hare Krishna mantra: Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So last Hare Hare is prema, and initial Hare Krishna is just Hare Krishna. But what I want to say is that in the beginning we should have an overview. What is the path we are going to traverse? Otherwise, we will just sit there in our little hole, spiritual hole, hopefully spiritual hole, and think that we are already achieved everything. So it's a path. It's a very dynamic process, and to be dynamic in this dynamic process. But the process is dynamic. We're not very dynamic, so we're not really coping up with the process itself. And that's why I think it's important for us to understand this dynamic and to understand what are the peculiarities or specialties of every step, and what is there, what is actually happening, because it's a mysterious process in one sense, and it's very difficult to describe even. There are different metaphors, and I will explain some of these metaphors, and I will also use some metaphor which I like to develop in this regard. But in reality, what is supposed to be going on, we have this material body, and we have little tiny spirit soul, which is inside the body, which is using this body as a machine to achieve certain purposes and goals in this material world. And while chanting Hare Krishna, a completely different process is supposed to take place. The spiritual development. What is spiritual development? What's happening with this little tiny miserable spirit soul which is inside, and what's happening with our body? How whether the body is being spiritualized or the completely different body is growing up, and whether it's growing or not. So these are different aspects. I don't know how much I will cover within these 3 nights, but I'll start. Whatever. I'm not so prepared, but I'll say something. Whatever is there, whatever Krishna will give me to speak about. So first of all, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he makes a very important statement. We all know that he basically says, what is spiritual development? Spiritual development is the process of replacing of material ego into spiritual ego. We have ahankar, false ego, false identification. And this false identification in the process of spiritual development, during the spiritual practice, is supposed to be turned or to be transformed into spiritual ego. Fully blossom spiritual ego, which basically means who I am in the spiritual world, what is my relationship with God, what I am doing in this relationship, up to the details of spiritual emotions which I am supposed to experience. And it's very interesting and very important to understand that, ultimately our path is the path of development of spiritual emotions. And material ego creates material emotions. Stress, anger, greed, shoka, moha, matsarya, envy, grief, all these material emotions. And Krishna, in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, he's very clear about this. He says that all the material emotions which we experience here are coming from ego, not from the soul. He specifically says it's not coming from Atma, it's coming from ahankar, from ego. But then, what is spiritual development? Spiritual development is transformation of these material emotions into the spiritual emotions, which are coming from the spiritual ego. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he specifically says that Mayavadis, their idea is that you destroy your ego. No ego. No sense of I. I don't exist. And this is false. We all know this is ultimately, consciousness means I. This is a very important part of the nature of the consciousness. So they say, or they speak, or they envision the whole spiritual development as the destruction of material ego. That's it, bas. Nothing more. You become zero. But we know that Vaishnava philosophy means that we take it from the minus, come to the 0 point, and then go to plus. Develop the positive understanding of who I am in the relationship with God. And this 0 point is actually, according to this scale or to this ladder of spiritual development, is the stage of Nishta. The actual positive spiritual development starts from Nishta onwards. Before Nishta, Shraddha, Sadhusanga, Bhajana Kriya, and Anartha Nivriti, it's a removal of negative elements of our nature and very insignificant building up of some spiritual strands of spiritual development is definitely there. But you come to this 0 point, which is Nishta, and from 0 point you're going up to the spiritual realm. But nevertheless, these initial stages of spiritual development are very important. What's going on there and how to reach Nishta, because even Nishta is a very high stage. According to Mayavadis, it's the highest. They don't go higher, because in the stage of Nishta, your identification with matter is destroyed. You don't identify yourself anymore with this mind or with this body. And for them, that's the crown jewel, the highest achievement. For us, it's just a very basic starting point to develop something really interesting. But still, nevertheless, Nishta is a very significant point, and if we're lucky, we will reach this point. And from Nishta onwards, it's kind of, it's not easy, but it's more clear, because we're already very clear. Before the stage of Nishta, we are confused. Because our identity, we're confused about our identity. We don't really know who we are. And this is the question which Sanatana Goswami asked Chaitanya Mahaprabhu during his first meeting. I don't know who I am. And it's a fact, I don't know who I am. Who am I? Am I this body which will die, anyway, so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he makes this very interesting statement that the whole process of spiritual development is the transformation of ego. And but what does it mean exactly? We will see more clearly. And he describes in some details how it goes on. For example, he says that, anyway, I will not touch this. It's a very difficult part. I will not confuse you even more. But what I want to say is that initially, that this identity, what is ego? Ego is identity. My understanding of who I am. I am this, I am that. And when people have material identity, when they identify with this material body and material mind, the ego undergoes certain crises. These are, in psychology, they are called identity crisis. Middle age crisis, or when you're a child and then you become a teenager, is a crisis. Because the body changes and the soul, the consciousness, doesn't know how to make, the consciousness is not really changing, but the body is changing, and, the whole process is very painful because you have to adjust. And then for some time, you are there in the middle age and there's not much changes, but then at one point you become an old man. And again, your body changes and it's very difficult to adjust. You already understand, oh, phew, my goodness, I am not as I was before. So these crises which accompany the material development. Material development, it's always crises, and there is a very interesting branch of psychology, developmental psychology, which actually studies in details this crises of development. Little child, when he's really little, when he's just a baby, he just came out from the womb, it's a big crisis for him. It's identity crisis. He was completely united with his mother's body, and all of a sudden he's separate from the body. It's a huge crisis. And then, his relationship with the mother, it's a crisis. It's a certain development, and so on and so forth. and they study all these crises and how one undergoes these crises and what's happening during these crises and what they say. The crisis is actually it's a turning point. And if you undergo this crisis in a successful way, you become more integrated. And but it's not necessarily that you undergo this crisis in a successful way. In this way, you become less integrated. You become more estranged towards yourself and towards the society. So the metaphor which I would like to present to your judgment is the comparison of the spiritual development with the material development of a child. Because, the spiritual development, as much as the material ego develops and undergoes certain stages and certain crises, in the same way, when our spiritual ego starts developing in the process of spiritual development, the same sort of dynamic takes place. When we have just Shraddha, little tiny speck of faith, Shraddha, the first, we're like spiritual babies. And this metaphor is used. Sometimes spiritual master is called as a father, and the spiritual birth, the initiation is called the second birth, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he also calls Shraddha as a little baby. So that's what I would like with you to discuss and to think about, how what's going on in our consciousness, what is the spiritual development, what are the processes which are going on, and what are the crises. So as much as if we don't go through the crisis, the material crisis, the identity crisis properly, we are not really ready for the next stage. What is crisis? Crisis is the preparation for the next stage. It's a certain structural change which has to take place so that you will be able to cope with the duties and the responsibilities of the next stage. So if you're not really fully, completely going through this crisis in a proper way, then you will not be able to develop properly in the next stage. Like sometimes people, they remain as children. Their body is grown up. They may be, 40, 50 years old, but because they didn't really undergo the proper process, under the proper guidance, they didn't go through the proper development, then inside they remained a child. Sometimes they're very, they're very sensitive. It's very, childish, they become, bitter or become very, so many problems are there. Why? Because the development was not taking place properly, was not going properly. And in the same way, of course, as I said, we all want to experience spiritual emotions, ecstasy of Hare Krishna, and as it is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sometimes we see this picture of spiritual emotions, but is the little child, can he experience the adult emotions? Can he really love? No, he cannot, because he's too small for this. And if he is not grown properly internally, even though his body may be grown, he will not be able to fall in love properly. He will not be able to enter into relationship, into deep relationship. And in the same way, if we are not undergoing all these processes properly, we will not be able to enter into deep relationship with Krishna. and we will not be able to experience the emotions in this relationship. Like everyone, everyone wants to have this, very amazing emotions, falling in love and, this and that, completely forgetting himself. And we want to enter into the same sort of relationship with God, but for that we have to grow up. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he said that this Sahaji mentality is when you're actually, spiritually, you are just a child, but you want to imitate the adult's emotions. And it's a very, it's a joke. It doesn't look nice when somebody is trying to imitate the adult's behavior. He's not capable of doing this. In the same way, when we try, oh, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, it's the same sort of cheap imitation which does not really help us in our spiritual development. So we have to really be clear what we have to go through, how it goes, how it works, and where we are now and what we have to achieve, and go like this. So that's a little introduction to the whole topic. And what else can be said about this? Perhaps, anyway, let's start with this. So the classical Indian texts, they say that there are 4 stages of development of a child. That the age from 1 to 5, from 0 to 5, first 5 years, it's called Kumara stage. Then next from 5 to 10 is Pauganda stage. And from 10 to 15, it's Kaishora stage. And from Kaishora onwards, it's Yovana and then some other. And sometimes they also say that before that, there is this Shishu stage. Shishu stage, when you are just a little baby, it's when you have this first teeth. Milk, how are they called?
Yeah,
milk teeth. So, I would like to suggest that we call Shraddha as a spiritual babyhood, Shishu, and then Sadhu Sangha as the spiritual childhood, Kumara, and then Bhajana Kriya as the spiritual Pauganda stage, and then Anartha Nivriti as a Kaishora stage. And from Nishtha onwards, we know Krishna, he reaches this Yovana stage and he never changes after that. So from Nishtha onwards, there is only more full development of the youth, spiritual youth. Spiritually, we never become old. Prema doesn't mean the spiritual old age. Prema means the full blooming youth. So we're reaching youth, and then we're blooming more and more and more. So, but let us reach youth first, so that we will be able to experience emotions. And in reality, the real spiritual emotions, before that, it's only a shadow of spiritual emotions. But on the stage of Nishtha, we will be able to experience something, and it will develop more and more onwards. But I'm more concerned now with you, and I think it's more relevant for us because we are not really so much grown up, even though we may be very leaders and sannyasis and gurus, but spiritually we are still little babies. So, and let's have our kindergarten talk about this. So, first I wanted to give the review of this whole spiritual process, and I think it will be important and interesting to see. When the small baby is born, then just I wanted to, there is something I wanted to say, something important about this. Yeah, okay. So, when the small baby is born, and in our metaphor it's Shraddha, the most important element which is going on between him and mother is this trust. And therefore, the very word Shraddha means trust. Shraddha Shabda Vishwasa Kahe Sudrida Nishchaya. Vishwas. Shraddha means Vishwas. So the essence of this first stage of spiritual development is developing of the trust between the spiritual child, baby, or us, and guru or sadhu or whoever is the representative of Krishna, some sadhu. So the trust is most important. Next, sadhu sangha. What is sadhu sangha? When the child grows little more, first it's a very, it's a very emotional state when there is only trust and nothing more, and the complete shelter from the mother is there. But the next stage, the baby is trying to understand what mother talks, right? That's the natural stage of development. And he tries to speak himself. So the stage of sadhu sangha is exactly this. The sadhu sangha, when initial trust is established, during sadhu sangha stage, you're trying to really, first you have just completely irrational trust. You just trust somebody. You don't know what he's talking about, you just know that you like him. And he gives you shelter. You feel some sort of kindness and good vibrations from this person. So you trust completely emotionally to him. Then the next stage is sadhu sangha. And what is the meaning of sadhu sangha? It's exactly like a small child who is trying to understand what the mother is talking about. He is learning to understand her, and he is learning to speak himself. And we know, usually when people, they develop some little faith, and then they, and they immediately they start preaching. What they preach, it's exactly like a small baby trying to say something. But in reality, what is going on? They're trying to learn the language. Yeah, and I heard so many, lectures which are given from this platform. We're not this body, we're not this body. Yeah, I know we're not this body, but when you're a little child, you have to repeat so many things without understanding what it is. And somebody says you're not this body, and you clearly understand that he doesn't understand what it means. But but it's natural. It's you know, you have to repeat something which you don't necessarily understand. You just repeat it because you heard it from your mother. You know, you just repeat it mechanically. So that's sadhu sangha stage. Next stage is very interesting because when the child, you know, till 5 years old, when he reaches his Pauganda stage, then he becomes very energetic. He has a lot of energy and he wants to do something on his own. So this is the stage of Bhajana Kriya. Bhajana Kriya means our attempt to serve God, to do something. And as much as in the first stages, Shraddha and Sadhu Sangha, the association with seniors, with those who are more mature, is very important. On this stage, the associations with our peers, with equals, becomes very important. Because when the child reaches this age, 5 years old till 10 years old, for him it's very important to deal with equals. He will not develop only with the parents. Initially, parents are most important driving force for his development. And to establish proper relationship with seniors is most important on these first stages. How to properly deal with them, how to develop trust, and how to respect them, so on and so forth. But in the Pauganda stage of our development and in Bhajana Kriya stage of our spiritual development, it's very important to start widening the scope of our association and deal with equals, to do something together. That's the essence of Bhajana Kriya. So first we learn to trust, then we learn to speak, then we learn to do something. That's Bhajana Kriya. The next stage is Anartha Nivritti. Anartha Nivritti is when when the little child first he speaks, then he does something, and when he becomes teenager, when he reaches this, 10 years old, and then he starts thinking. Before he didn't think really. The thinking capacity starts developing in this Kaishora stage. When one becomes teenager, some independent thinking, and usually at this point, teenagers, they think that they're most intelligent and so on and so forth. Whereas they're still stupid, but but they're completely convinced that they're the most intelligent in the whole of universe. But it's because the brain develops, because the thinking capacity develops. So what's happening in this Anartha Nivritti stage is the same sort of processes going on. You first learn how to speak without thinking much. Then you learn, what to do. And usually, the second stage, everyone is very energetic. He's just running here and there, doing something, Harinam, this and that. But then he starts thinking, the whole, what he learned before, he starts thinking himself. It becomes his. As much as teenagers, they question everything which they learned before, it has to become their own discovery, so to speak. So Anartha Nivritti is this very painful period of spiritual development when you basically question everything which was there before. You start doubting some dogmas and you reconsider some things. You think in a more independent way, and it's very important. If you don't do this, you will not progress further. So, and we know this teenage period of material development, it's difficult. And anartha nivritti is equally difficult. It's a very difficult period of spiritual development. And then when we reach the stage of nishta, then we start, the feeling comes. That's the next development. You know, first you learn how to speak, then how to act. You know, and then you continue speaking and acting, but then you start thinking, but then the feeling comes, the more elevated, not just these primitive emotions. Of course, you know, child has some emotions, but this is not emotions in the proper sense of the word. It's a very primitive sort of emotions. But the elevated emotions, the real emotions, which are important for our spiritual development, they start onwards. So that's more or less the description of what's going on in these stages. And I guess I will not speak more. I could speak more about this, but I want to touch a little bit of this first, in more detailed manner, the first stage of our spiritual development. What is Shraddha? The very word Shraddha comes from two Sanskrit words, Shrad, or Krad, or Hrad, and Dha. Dha means to place. And Hrad, or Shrad, means heart. Shraddha means, literally means where you place your heart. It's the placement of your heart. And Krishna himself says, Shraddhamayayam Purusho, that the Purusha is full of Shraddha. And this Shraddha is not necessarily spiritual Shraddha. Everyone is full of Shraddha. He speaks this verse in the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where he explains material kinds of Shraddha, faith in the modes of material nature. And Tamagun, people in Tamagun, they believe in something. This atheists, they say we don't believe in anything. They believe that they don't believe in anything. That's their belief. That's their belief system. It's a very tamasic belief system, but it's a belief system. It's a religion, nevertheless. Whether they understand this or not, they may be dull enough not to understand it, but it's still a belief system. So everyone has Shraddha. And Shraddha, as I said, it's a sentimental thing. Because you're placing your heart. And of course, Krishna says, if you believe, and it's very interesting. In the 17th chapter, he explains that what you believe in, you more or less believe in what is in your mind. This Shraddha in the modes of material nature is that when you believe in something which is there in your mental creation, and it's not really bringing you anywhere. It's not really changing your karma, so to speak. You remain yourself. You know, so many people, they develop certain beliefs according to their conditioning. Their conditioned nature is as such, you know, certain percentage of tamagun, certain percentage of rajagun, and accordingly they have some belief system, according to the constitution of their mind, and it doesn't change anything. So what happens when we speak about Shraddha, when Srila Rupa Goswami speaks that Shraddha is the first stage of spiritual development, is that when we meet a sadhu, and in a traditional setting, it's, you know, somebody goes to a holy place, to some tirtha, and he meets a sadhu. You know, it's basically the whole design of Vedic culture is that, people are inspired to go to holy places, to Kumbh Mela. Yeah. What is Kumbh Mela? Kumbh Mela is that you go there just for some, for some material benefit, because some nectar is there, and and you take baths and this. But in the meantime, the sadhus are also there, Like this Kumbh Mela, millions of people are there, and all the sadhus are coming there. So in reality, the design is like this. You buy hook and by crook, as Prabhupada used to say, by all means, you inspire somebody, people to go to holy place for some material need, but then they may see or sometimes hear a nice saintly person, and they become attracted, because it's natural. When somebody is really saintly, you become attracted to him. You see somebody who is happy. Basically, what you're attracted to, you're attracted to the happiness. You see a person who is completely, totally, irrevocably happy. He's not going to be, morose or disturbed by all these things. And you naturally want to become like him. So if this is happening, if you somehow or other, by some strike of good fortune, you place your faith or your heart into this person, you really develop some little tiny initial trust in this person. You see somebody who has integrity, who has, who is pure, and who is completely selfless. It's a very important thing, sadhu has to be selfless. Unfortunately, of course, nowadays we can see that, there are so many sadhus who are not so selfless. They put the garb of the sadhu, they speak nice words, but internally they're not so selfless. But ideally, if by your good fortune you place your heart or your trust into a real person, then your spiritual development starts. Then really your new life starts. Why? Because by associating with this person, you completely change the composition of your mind or of your subtle body. You're not in the same, you're not really doing the same old stuff which you have been doing. Your Shraddha is in somebody else who is way above you. So, and as I said, this initial Shraddha, it's very sentimental. It's not rational. And of course, if you have some sukriti, some bhakti unmukhi sukriti, some real credit, pious credit, but in a spiritual sense, then according to this, you will develop faith, in a proper person. And we can see, people, they put their place, they put their heart in different persons. According to what? According to the constitution of their heart and the level of their sukriti. And Krishna arranges this. We have to really very clearly understand that it's Krishna who arranges this meeting, and this initial kind of response, yes, I want to become like him. I want to follow him. I want to, some sort of attraction is there. It may be, it's completely irrational. You don't understand anything, but some respect is there. Therefore, this Shraddha is used. Shraddha, as we all know, means respect. You develop some sort of respectful attitude towards a saintly person. And from this, your spiritual development starts, and as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, you're still completely engrossed in your body and in your mind. You are not, nothing spiritual is there, but still something very important happened. And as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, this Bhakti Lata Bij starts, the planting of Bhakti Lata Bij starts within your heart. Sometimes people say that Bhakti Lata Bij, Shraddha means Bhakti Lata Bij is planted in your heart. It's not. The planting of Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of Bhakti Lata, of real Bhakti, it's a process which takes years. Because for the seed to be planted in your heart has to be cultivated, the soil of your heart has to be proper, otherwise the seed will not really grow there. So this process actually, from Shraddha to Nishta, is the process of planting the seed of Bhakti. But what is most important, the seed should be proper. It should be the seed of Bhakti. When we meet a person, a preacher, and who is this preacher? He has to be sadhu. And sometimes people say, sadhu reva samantavya, Krishna says, apichet sudaracharo bhajate mamananya bhak. Even if he commits all kinds of horrible activities, he's still a sadhu. He has to be considered sadhu. Is this sadhu meant? No. Srila Jiva Goswami says, no. It has to be real sadhu. It doesn't have to be this apichet sudaracharo sadhu. It has to be sadhu who can give you shastriya shraddha. What I mean to say is that from the very beginning, the preacher or the sadhu with whom you have some initial attraction has to give you proper seed, the proper knowledge. You may not understand anything, but he has to give you proper knowledge or some, at least some proper things. Otherwise, it will be genetically modified Bhakti Lata Bija. And it's not a fact that from this genetically modified bija, the plant will go to Vaikuntha. Not a fact. Most probably it will not grow that far. So what I mean to say is that sadhu has to speak according to Vedas. Sadhu has to speak according to Shastras. Has to speak according to scriptures, not what is there in his head. Otherwise he may plant so many other seeds in your heart, and you don't need all these seeds. You already have these seeds. The seeds of karma and jnana are already there. We need the seed of bhakti, and seed of bhakti basically means the scriptures, the real scriptural conclusions, shastriya shraddha. Even though you may not understand anything, and you don't understand anything, but still it has to be real, as much as the milk which mother gives to the child has to be real. If the mother doesn't have real milk and still wants to feed the child with this, this powder milk, or with all this, artificial things, that the child may grow, but he will not grow properly, and he will be weak, and he will have all kinds of diseases. In the same way, if even in the initial stages, what I mean to say is that, sometimes we overemphasize this preaching aspect of our movement. It's good that we preach, but we also have to understand the grave responsibility, especially of preaching to the new people. Because when overly enthusiastic spiritual baby starts bubbling something and calls it preaching, God knows what's what's going to happen. The whole spiritual life or career may not be very successful after that. So we have to understand the grave responsibility. What I want to say is that from the very beginning, the preacher who is planting the seed of trust, of faith in somebody else, has to do it strictly according to the scriptures. Not according to his imagination, not according to his speculation, not according to anything else. He has to know scriptures himself. He has to behave properly himself. And therefore, again, as I said, there is a very high demand. And therefore, Jiva Goswami in Bhakti Sandarbha, he says that there are gurus who are not so selfless, and he said you should avoid such gurus. You should avoid such preachers who are not selfless. You should find somebody who is selfless as much as the mother is completely selfless when she is feeding the baby. She doesn't expect anything from the baby. She just wants to feed him with this milk. And she has a lot of milk. She wants to give the milk, of course, the real milk. So if this is there, then the development will be proper. Still, I probably have to finish now, but just a few words I will say to conclude this. What I want to say at the end is there is a crisis. As I said, in every stage of spiritual development, as much as in every stage of our material development, there is some crisis. And the nature of the crisis which little baby may have with the mother is that when the trust somehow or other is not being developed. So when we take the spiritual development, what kind of first crisis we undergo? Because we don't have discrimination in the beginning. What's usually happening when we meet with the sadhu, we usually, the tendency is there, we try to idealize him. We try to elevate him to a completely, he's there. It's very common. If you take any spiritual organization, the people who come, they need to have completely inflated understanding about the spiritual figure which is there. Ideally, if he creates miracles left and right, that's the best. Because that's the nature of this phase. They don't have, the phase is very sentimental, and they usually have this idealized, inflated understanding, and they practically, literally, as much as the little child, the psychologists, they say that for little child, his mother is God. The little child completely, because he's totally dependent on mother, she's all powerful for him. So in the same way, when the spiritual seeker comes to a guru or to a sadhu or to a spiritual organization, he has to have this understanding, he inadvertently develops this understanding that this guru, he's God. He's practically God. And he has to feed this sometimes very unrealistic phase by all kinds of nonsense. I know ISKCON culture very well. The people start saying, "Oh, my guru, he's such a miracle man. He comes to my dream every other night." And he gives me secret mantras and this and that. And And sometimes, people first, they make this unrealistic picture of a sadhu, a guru. And then sometimes when they see, they cannot really understand that the sadhu is a human being. And when they see some human side of them, sometimes they completely lose their trust. And both is not correct. This first crisis, which you have to undergo, is to understand what sadhu is giving to you. He's not supposed to be the miracle man, Prabhupada, so many times he was asked, please show us some miracles. Who asked him to show the miracles? Those people who wanted to have faith in him. But Prabhupada never went for it. He said, no. Yeah, once in Bombay, somebody asked, Swamiji, can you show us miracles? And he was a businessman. He said, I went to America, Prabhupada said, I went to America with 20 rupees. And a few years after, I returned to India with millions of followers and millions of rupees. This is my miracle. This is a miracle which I made. Isn't it a miracle? Yeah, this is a miracle. Yeah, sure, it is a miracle. No doubt about it. So, but Prabhupada, he was not, he was not really. Sometimes, when you see this in a very, neophyte devotee, this desire, to attribute to you some miraculous qualities, you go for it. Prabhupada never went for it. He never went for it. There was a very interesting story in the life of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. One very nice young person was attracted to him. And he wanted to become his disciple. He became his follower and he was listening to him and he was, becoming more and more enthusiastic. And then what he saw that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is checking the books, all these expenses and all this kind of stuff, and he became completely disappointed. And he said, no, he's not a real sadhu. So this is this first crisis, the crisis of trust, when one has unrealistic understanding of who the guru is, who the sadhu is, what he's supposed to do, what he's supposed to do to you, and who he is. And if he doesn't undergo this crisis properly, then most probably he will go away, or he may still remain in the society of devotees, but he will not develop properly. That's what I said. If you undergo the crisis properly, then you become more integrated inside and outside. Means you have more healthy working relationship with others, and you are more integrated internally yourself. If you don't undergo the developmental crisis properly, then you remain undeveloped, so to speak, and you're not really prepared to do what you're supposed to do next. So that's a little introduction to the whole topic. This first initial stage of our development, who the sadhu should be, how he should behave towards the would-be spiritual child, and how this child or the neophyte devotee what he has to understand, what he has to take, and the whole little introduction to this. Then we may cover some other stages like sadhu sangha, but what I also want, and maybe I will speak a little more about this in the next discussion which we will have, the difference between Shastriya Shraddha and Lokika Shraddha. Because the Shraddha can be of two types, and Srila Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur both they say that Shraddha can be Lokika. Lokika basically means conventional Shraddha, socially defined Shraddha, and Shastriya Shraddha. And what I see in ISKCON is that Prabhupada was very Shastric, and he was giving the milk of the Vedas from the very beginning. He was only speaking Shastra. He was not trying to cheat us in any case. But what I can see in the development of ISKCON, and you spoke about the future of ISKCON. The future of ISKCON is being made now, depending on some very crucial decisions which we will make. It will define the future. I don't think the future of ISKCON is defined now, but it may be defined according to certain decisions. So what I can see, there is a lot of Lokika Shraddha and mechanisms to establish Lokika Shraddha in ISKCON, instead of trying to implant real Shastriya Shraddha. So I may speak a little bit more about this. What is Shastriya Shraddha, what is Lokika Shraddha, how to distinguish. What Shraddha do I have? What kind of, because, to have Shraddha in something, it's nothing special. Everyone has Shraddha. And so many people believe in God, and so many people believe in Krishna. It doesn't mean much. Who is Krishna? How to come to him? What is the path which goes to him? How properly practice this to come to Krishna in Vrindavan, which is our real goal? These are not so simple questions. Anyway, so there are different Krishnas. And it doesn't mean that we all believe in the same Krishna. They may be called Krishna, but they are different Krishnas. So what is our Shraddha, into which Krishna we believe, and what we do to develop this? Let's talk a little bit about this more. Okay?
Questions? Maharaj, you've shattered everyone. It's like start all over again.
It's never too late.
Or rather not to fit to start again. But qualify.
So I think no, please.
The time taken for childhood to youthhood, is it same for everyone? Or?
Well, no, it's not same to everyone. As I said, even in our material development, even though it says, 5, from 0 to 5, from 5 to 10, from 10 to 15, it works only if everything is proper, only if all the conditions are in place. Like I said in the beginning, if you have proper adults, seniors who are really taking care of you and who give you unconditional love, then you develop, then your childhood is successfully, gone. And then Pauganda, you have to have a lot of equals with whom you work and with whom you play and with whom you develop. It's also very important. You still have very loving, parents, but you have your friends. And also, depending on, on your friends, who are your friends, how developed they are, this is crucial for your development in this stage. Then the next stage, from 10 to 15, it's very important for you to have relationship with those who are junior to you. I didn't mention this, but I remember now, because for teenagers it's very important to start taking care of their younger siblings, or those who are younger than them, because in this way they're taking responsibility, and by taking responsibility they develop themselves. Without taking responsibility for the lives of others, it's very difficult to develop. Therefore, in traditional families, all the those who are more senior, they take care of their junior brothers and sisters. They start doing this. So in the same way, this is important. And Narada Muni himself says that you only develop if you have if you are properly established in all the relationship with the seniors, relationship with the peers, and relationship with the juniors, if this is there. So if all the conditions are in place, then it will take this. But if they're not, you may delay in your development. You may not develop so smoothly, so to speak.
There's a problem. There's a lot of delayed mode happening here. We'll have to personally sit with you. This may not be the forum. I think you need to be around a lot of places more often if really this process has to be put into motion to correct the very future. It has a direct bearing. So one of the things that came out in the SDGs, which ties into what you said, and obviously, we look forward to your expanding that further, is we talk about the notion of more devotees, and we talk about happier devotees. But now there's another notion which is most critical, is mature devotees. So I think there's happiness when you're a child also, and there can be happiness when you're in an adult body and still in a child consciousness, but there's no maturity. You don't call that person a matured person, who's adult, who acts like a child. Yeah. So,
Yeah, we sometimes say more devotees, happy devotees, and if devotees become unhappy, just go away. We only need happy devotees.
Yeah, right. Here's one of them. Just go away. Great. There's another one. Go away. Maharaj, believe me, you've got many patients here.
Maharaj, we decide not to come.
That's the fear.
Maharaj, in every stage leading up to Nishtha, does the practitioner, is he aware that he's in that stage, or is it his mind telling him?
No, you have to, otherwise, as I said, it's a science. It's a science, and science means you have to know, you have to understand what's going on, and why it is going on, and otherwise you will not be able to overcome all these problems. You will be stuck. You yourself should know to a certain extent, or at least those who are in the position of counselors, gurus, or whatever they definitely should know what's going on and how to help people to develop properly.
Is it possible for somebody to have nishtha, to experience a little nishtha before it actually goes all over on the other side? Is it like a gradual process, or would it be like you come to one level and then only you move to the next?
Yeah, usually you come to a certain level, and it basically means, of course, it's not, it's always little simplified, it may be, but usually it's like this. You come, you may understand, and you may have some precursors of some future developments, but usually, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, when you go from stage to stage, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains it very clearly. He says, when you go from stage to stage, you first have to be firmly established on this stage, and then you put one of your foot on the higher stage, and then you gradually bring another foot, and then you establish there, and then again. So, to be established in the stage basically means that you know the rules of this stage, and you follow the rules of this stage. It's not that our sadhana is always the same, stale, You gradually increase your sadhana, the intensity of your sadhana, or at least the quality of your sadhana, what you do. But for that, you need to first to be established on the stage, and then go a little further and little further. If you try to, to jump over in a stage, not being established on this stage, you may just injure yourself. That's what often happens. Sometimes people, they are in a hurry, they want to come quickly, but they forget some things, and they sometimes injure themselves, and then they go back in their spiritual development. That also happens.
So that lesson that you're supposed to learn, if it keeps happening often enough, that means you haven't learned the lesson.
Yes.
And then when you actually learn the lesson, then you do not make that mistake again. You are more mature to...
Yeah, like as I said, the lessons is what I call crisis, the spiritual crisis. So the first lesson is, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada says, or Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Guru, who is real Guru? The Putana is the first problem, first obstacle on your spiritual path. The false Guru and the real Guru, who is real Guru. And if you don't learn, if you don't understand actually who is Guru, you will abandon one Guru, you will go to another Guru, you will abandon this other Guru, you will go to Satya Sai Baba, and he will do some miracles to you, and you will go somewhere else, and because you don't learn this lesson. The Guru is someone who gives you the milk of spiritual knowledge, who feeds you with this milk of spiritual knowledge. And if you try to attribute to him some other qualities, so that's the lesson which you have to learn. If you learned it, then you can go further. Then you can go further. And then you will not go back. It's also very interesting. Like, if you achieved a certain stage, and if you pass this certain stage, you will never go back. You will not go back. But if you didn't really pass it, then you will be always fluctuating. Re-exam. But if you achieve this, then further, and so on and so forth. like Shyamasundar Prabhu, he tells a very interesting story also. He was dealing with some drugs before he became a devotee, and then his karma came to him. He became a devotee, but then he was supposed to be put in prison. So he came to Prabhupada and he said to Prabhupada, I will have to go to prison for my previous some little things. Prabhupada says, why? He said, because I was selling drugs. Prabhupada looked at him and said, I also sell drugs. Because he was in this pharmacy. He said, no problem, don't worry about that. He was released very quickly.
This Malti Mataji is
Yeah. Malti and Shyamasundari.
So Maharaj, last time you came and we had a similar session on japa. We got shattered because all the japa that you were doing. So I go for japa walks. I don't understand whether I'm walking or doing japa. But I still continue to do that. So that was one. Now again so I think I have a humble submission to you.
That I don't come anymore.
All over again. Let's start all over again. And you put everyone through a process of reinitiation.
Okay.
Come on, that's a fact. So you set everyone up. Okay.
Maharaj, you yourself said kindergarten.
Don't take it so seriously. It's a kindergarten.
You can't say that. Yeah. Yeah.
But Maharaj, on a serious note, no.
Oh,
What is...
Well, I was not joking.
No, Maharaj, not take seriously. I'm saying...
Oh, yeah.
Maharaj, what as you see what we need to change in the future, we have to do something today for there to be a change tomorrow. What is it that you feel that we really need to learn and imbibe and know? And if whatever that is, maybe what you're going to tell us, how can we learn from you? How can you teach us?
That I don't know how you can.
Maharaj, you have a plan.
Maharaj,
I'm sure you have some
Maharaj,
kind
I have a
of
problem
ideas
now.
and plans.
No, you can't come here and first tell us all that you told us about japa. And then you start on this journey today. And then you go away and says, listen, how can I help you? That's being very unfair. So, you know what we'll do?
Maharaj, you cannot point out the deficiencies and then leave us.
No, Maharaj, when everyone leaves, we need to deal with this.
No, I think first, as I said, we have to establish our faith firmly on the basis of the scriptures. We have to understand, because as Bhakti Vijnana Thakur says, that the beginning of spiritual life, he calls it, the first period of spiritual life, he calls it Krama Shuddha Shravana Dasha. When you hear, but you hear, according to him, is Krama Shuddha, not chaotically, Krama Shuddha. You hear it in the proper sequence. Yeah, in the proper sequence, according to your adhikar. You understand, you get the systematic, wholesome knowledge. Because when you only have some, strange of mixture. It's knowledge doesn't change you. It's just chaotic data which is there in your mind. But when you have a complete systematic understanding and knowledge, then it will become very easy for you to change, to transform, to go from stage to stage. So in my opinion, the most important is to have this systematic education. Like in any educational institution, you cannot just come to an educational institution and they'll all of a sudden, without teaching you arithmetics, they'll start giving you some in whatever it is, higher mathematics. You first have to know arithmetics and then go to algebra and then go like this, and then you will be able to understand. In ISKCON, today we speak about Varnashrama, tomorrow we speak about Rasa Lila, and in between we speak about the political situation. Whatever. This is not Krama Shuddha Shravana Das. This is not proper. To develop spiritually, we have to. And Srimad Bhagavatam has a certain design. Prabhupada, he always stressed, first Bhagavad Gita, you learn Bhagavad Gita, this is the ABC of spiritual knowledge, you know it perfectly well, then you go next stage, and then you go to this. This is in one sense it's simple. He gave us everything. It's just a question of putting it in practice. But we always doing it. So in my opinion, it's simple. It's just a question of getting very systematic and proper knowledge, and coupled with spiritual practices. Not just theoretical knowledge, of course, but together with spiritual practices, and then it will become very easy and simple, and it's very exciting also. But when you don't have these systematic things, it becomes very strange. So that's what I say.